Two further questions for us this evening. Let's come on to our fourth question from Nadia Ward. Nadia.
After time of continued austerity and no protection to school budgets, how can the promise of 500 new free schools be justified?
Election pledged by David Cameron. Stephen Lower.
Well, I mean, the fact is it can't be justified, can it? I mean, we are in favour. I mean, I lay this on the line here. We are in favour of all schools being part of the local authority family, properly not run by local authorities. Maybe they were in 1973 when I started, but it's a jolly long time since schools were run by local authorities. They are effectively run by their heads and governors and staff in the schools, but they have to be within a proper framework. And one of the really dispiriting things is that when David Cameron made that announcement, he said that the Free Schools programme is the best school improvement programme there has ever been. And I'm afraid, far be it from me to say that's a lie, but the fact is there's no evidence for it. There is no evidence for it. What we know is the most successful school improvement programme that there has been is the London Challenge, which was not about opening up a lot of schools where we don't need them. It was about getting schools to work together and enhance their own capacity. And it wasn't just in London, it was also in other places. And I'm bound to say that I saw an exchange on Twitter the other day where a sitting Conservative MP was challenging, I think, a Labour MP, but I don't know who it was now, about, you will close all these free schools. Well, actually, Nicky, I think you've closed a couple of free schools, haven't you? Because they haven't been doing too well. So it isn't, it's not the NUT's position that free schools or academies or any other type of school would close. It is that they would simply return to their proper and natural home of being part of the local education authority. And the fact is that the numbers are not good for free schools, are they? They have generally not opened in places of significant need. And I have to say, the policy exchange research that came out last week, which I know you did respond to before you had a chance to read it in any great detail. But the fact is that even the report itself acknowledges that everything that was being said about them was not strictly true. The data was on a very small number of schools. And it was originally, all the talk was that these schools would be opened by parents, it would all be to do with local need. Now, most of the free schools, 45% of the free schools have actually been opened by academy sponsors. So this is not about giving the parents the choice to open these schools. So we are very dispirited by the prospect of these schools. The numbers do not stack up. Most of them have opened in places where there is not a perceived need, and they've unbalanced other provision. Now, it's not my wish, or the National Union of Teachers' wish, that any school should be unsuccessful. Of course we don't want them to be successful, but what we want is a proper and coherent system, and not to spend ridiculous amounts of money. I mean, the story of the free school in London, the sixth form provision free school in London, at some ludicrous number of millions of pounds, where actually there was no need for additional sixth form provision. It's these kinds of things which are clearly a horrible waste of taxpayers' money, and whether it's a time of austerity or whether it's any other time, we should always spend taxpayers' money properly and sensibly, and we should make sure that we have a coherent education system where, frankly, parents have a route by which they can find out what's going on in the schools. The idea that you've got schools not subject to the Freedom of Information Act, or where there is commercial sensitivity being argued, it's just not right. It's not the right way to run the system. So what we want is a good local school for every child in its local authority. We genuinely believe that that's vote winning, and that's what we'd like to see.
I was very pleased with that statement on the Green Party
Party's website in response to David Cameron's pledge about 500 new free schools. And what I have to say about that is that it demonstrates how out of step the government are with the needs and wishes of people within the education system, parents, pupils, teachers, school staff alike. We have mounting evidence that free schools are actually adding to the crisis of school places, particularly primary schools, by diverting funds away from state schools. And this is basically, it's a commitment to a competition-driven ideology. It's free schools are a failed conservative vanity project. At a time when education budgets for state schools are being cut, and I think it's appalling that the government would hand over vast amounts of public money for a scheme which we know undermines democratic accountability. It has a frightening lack of transparency surrounding the approval of applications and allocation of funding, which has been demonstrated by somebody actually trying to find out what is the process that free schools go through when those applications are put in, and that was turned down after quite a lengthy court battle. These are bits of information that people in the community need to know about free schools. And everything that is out there that you can find out right now demonstrates that that's something we shouldn't be supporting any more of, and they should be brought back, or should be brought into, not brought back into, brought into local authority control.
I hate free schools. I have to say, in 1905 when the Education Act was first started and local authorities came into being, at least you started the process of democratic accountability of schools and the school system. And that seemed to be, satisfactory for the last 100 years. This is the political bit. We've had a Secretary of State, your predecessor, who's the most ideological, right-wing Secretary of State since we've had since the war. And he's broken up education, and that's the consensus that we've had since the war. Let's face it, we've had this reduction in the local authority and their removal almost completely from the educational scene. And what have we got? We've got a fractured system which actually is controlled by the Secretary of State from Westminster. Anybody can set up now anybody can almost set up a free school. A bit like in the Victorian times. The only problem is that the rest of us are now paying for it. And that money is actually coming from the general schools budget. My view, and I call me old-fashioned, is that schools are should be state-run, should be accountable to the local authority, and should be coordinated through the local authority. If you take places like Salby in this constituency, parents are complaining because the school is bursting at the seams. Class sizes are far too large. That's the investment we need, and it's only a local authority that could actually look at the whole of the county and actually decide on those priorities and where the investment should go. Free schools is a way of almost like sort of private health insurance, jumping the queue and getting a school in the area of your choice, rather than the priorities of a particular area. I'm sorry, I'm completely against the idea of free schools. Howard Stevenson, and then we'll come to you.
I think what the free school announcement illustrates is a lot of what is wrong about how we do education policy in this country. So just to sort of recap what happened around about that time, David Cameron, I think, made the announcement on a Monday that there will be 500 free schools. The same day, Policy Exchange had produced a report, a research report, which indicated that it couldn't prove that free schools were having a very dramatic effect because they're far too new. So it had to try to prove that free schools had an impact on neighbouring schools. That data, that report was released, I think, at midnight on that Monday. I think by midday, that research had been pretty much discredited. Jonathan Simons, who is the author of the report, is not neutral in this matter. He's set up his own free school. So you have a sort of choreographed announcement between the Prime Minister and the independent think tank, one using the research of the other to reinforce the policy. So it becomes a sort of self-reproducing system. And what there's a real absence of is real evaluation and research about the impact of these schools. You can look elsewhere in the world and find research which looks at what's happened in similar situations. And we need to look at these things over a much longer period of time. So you'll see lots of data around academies and free schools. We really don't know at the moment. It's a huge gamble, it's a big risk. We've gone into it very, very fast. Nobody can really make any claims, I don't think, about the achievements one way or the other. But what we can do is we can learn a lot from other countries. Actually, we can learn quite a lot from Sweden. I know free schools here are different to free schools there. But it's really interesting to look at the experience of Sweden. And I think if you did look at the experience of Sweden, you'd think twice about replicating that experiment over here. If you look in the United States, places like New Orleans, where following Hurricane Katrina, there was a sort of complete reorganising of education in New Orleans, based on a sort of free school academy type model, the charter schools in the United States, but a sort of proliferation of those sorts of schools. And what we've seen is a bunching of schools in areas where they're not needed, schools becoming increasingly segregated by race and class, because in that marketised environment, that's quite often the consequences. Those cases are out there. We can learn from them, but we don't seem to want it, actually, because we seem to want to listen to the research, which tells us what we always wanted to know before we started. So that allows us to then come out with the policy that we always wanted in the first place. And I think we have to come up with a policy about having a much longer term perspective, much more genuinely evidence-based, based on independent research, much more conversation and discussion, much more building of consensus. And if we were to do that, we could create, I think, an education system that would be much more enduring than the ones that we have currently, which, as we know, as you know, because you deal with the consequences, swing backwards and forwards depending on changes of politicians, with all the workload implications that go with that.
How do you justify the promise of 500 new free schools?
Well, thank you. Well, let me say, I suspect from the outset that I may not win over many people in the audience with all I'm about to say. And based on Christine's, what she said, and I think Christine, I think you were admirably honest, and you just don't like the idea of academies and free schools. And fine, I understand that, but it's absolutely not a position I share. The consensus that our panelists have talked about is that parents will accept the school that they're offered, even if they are really unhappy with the place or the provision, the quality of the provision that is on offer. What free schools offer is the opportunity for parents, charities, academy sponsors to say, no, we're not happy with what's on offer here, or we need more. 17% of free schools are either special schools or offer alternative provision. And I would defy anybody in this room to go to something like the Boxing Academy that's open in London, that is helping young men who are absolutely at risk of falling out of the education system, disengaged, potentially coming out of young offenders institutes, and actually getting that one-to-one provision that is keeping them in the education system and setting them up for life, for saying that that is a bad thing to have. Now, free schools offer at the moment, there are 40,000 children being educated in currently open free schools. By the time all those potentially the pipeline are open, that goes up to 270,000. So the simple fact is they are offering places to young people who obviously will be educated or need to be educated in one way or the other. They are often open in areas of great deprivation, and actually the latest wave, 90% of those schools were offering places, let alone worrying about the need. There is a difference between basic need and educational need, and that's what that report was saying. Christine talked about, in some sort of terms, about sponsored academies opening up free schools, but actually she then talked in admirable terms, or admiring terms, of the London Challenge. Well, one of the great things about the London Challenge was that schools were transferred out of local authority control, they've been badly for years, and they became sponsored academies. Howard talked about the research. Well, over 20% of free schools are already rated outstanding by Ofsted, and if you add in the those rated good, that's over 70%. Well, Ofsted at the moment are the accountability framework that we have. And finally, I just asked Matthew what he thinks about Tristram Hunt's comments today, that we're not even going to have free schools opened by people in this country, teachers, parents, organisations. We're now going to be inviting innovators from overseas, Singapore, Australia, because actually we're going to invite them in, apparently, under a Labour government to open free schools or new kinds of academies. I think free schools are contributing to a very exciting education landscape in this country that's turning around education. We need to have 1 million more young people in good and outstanding schools, and I think they're absolutely the right thing. They are part of the key educational mix, particularly the quality they offer in terms of alternative vision and special schools.
Matthew,
I don't think I convinced you.
Matthew, do you want to come in on that? Well, just in the beginning, before I make a statement, I have to say that, you know, obviously, in terms of getting expertise in to help her with education, we'll get it from where we can. So I'll apologise, I've not studied the statement from this morning. I'll just go with one point, and that is that the suggestion that if parents are not happy with their offer, then they have the right to set up the school elsewhere. What happens to those parents who are left in those schools that they're not happy with? No, my view is you improve the schools that they're not happy with. That's the way forward.
Actually, what you do is you do both. You improve schools, and that's what the report was saying. That actually, in areas where you set up the schools, what you're seeing, particularly for those most disadvantaged pupils, is that surrounding schools are also responding to that increased offer and that opportunity for good education. And I think that's the right thing to do for the young people in this country.
But that's precisely what was discredited about the research, Nicky. It's just based on nonsense. There are far too few. And I think, you know, there's another numbers game going on here. I live in Hampshire. There's a preschool run by ARC, one of the chains of academies. It was rated outstanding, but it did only have 28 children. Now, great that you're outstanding with 28 children. I defy anybody not to be outstanding with 28 reception children. I mean, so the idea that all of these free schools are doing so well, you have to say, well, what, you know, how many kids are they actually dealing with?
Christine, thank you. I'm very aware that I was hoping we'd have a question on libraries, and then we could get Carol to talk more on that, but time is going to be running against us. But Carol, if I can
just a quick point on what's been discussed. Why do we need this patchwork quilt of education, which is really leading to separate development? And I don't want my money going to mixed schools or Toyota school. As for libraries, my statement about libraries is that libraries are a hub within communities. They're important. They are a hospital for the mind. We should be making more of our libraries, and if we lose our libraries, we're going to lose a really big part of communities that have already been decimated over the last 25, 30 years. Libraries helped me. They help all people, intergenerational, from early years right through to elders and pensioners. We must keep our libraries going.
Closure of some in Leicestershire, but looking at the time, as much as it pains me to say it, because it's been a great evening this evening, that for now we are out of time. I hope that you've got something from this evening. I want to give my thanks to our panel this evening, to Howard Stevenson, to Matthew O'Callaghan, to Carol Leeming, to Christine Burr, Samantha Pancheri, and to Nicky Morgan, and thank you as well.